This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website or domain, go to squarespace.com. Hey everybody, and welcome to a new video. If you're like a lot of people, when you get a new camera or a lens, you probably have a few go-to settings that you play with, but mostly you leave many settings like they came from the factory. This video is about settings or features your camera and lenses have that you may not know about, and I'll also teach you how to use them, set them up right, and I'll cover lots of brands and models to help you set them up in your own camera. If you stay for my bonus tip, I'll tell you what this thing is for. My name is Simon d'Entremont and I'm a professional nature and wildlife photographer living in Eastern Canada. I make weekly videos giving you photo tips or taking you behind the scenes for nature photography. Subscribe if you want to see more. Okay, let's get right into it, and note that there's no way to cover all the brands and all the models. We'd be here all day. Even certain brands have different menus for different camera lines within the same brand. But I've got enough here, I hope, to get you started. Now you may have a camera that has focus points that are adjustable or movable. You can see them on the back LCD or maybe in the viewfinder. This can be really handy when your subject isn't in the middle, as you can move your focus point to any place in the field of view, maybe using a joystick on the back of your camera. But after it's way off to the side, usually you want to move it back to the center. Or having placed your camera in your camera bag, you take it out only to find that the focus point is way off into a corner, so you need to manually move it back. Well, there's a trick for that. On many cameras, like my Canon and most cameras with a joystick, you press the back button or joystick down to reset the focus point to the center. On some Sony cameras, you can hit the trash button twice or custom set a programmable button to focus standard. On Nikon and Fuji's, you can program reset to center to the OK button in the menus to customize buttons. Now you may have a lens that has a switch on it for stabilization modes like 1, 2, 3 on a Canon or Sony, or on a Nikon VR, which is for vibration reduction, with modes like normal and sport. What are these settings for? The different settings control the behavior of the image stabilization system in your lens, which moves optical elements around to settle any motion in the camera and lens. The longer the lens, the more helpful this is. Here's an example of me hand-holding my big 600mm lens without stabilization, and what happens when I turn it on. Note how much more stable the view is, allowing me to use slower shutter speeds and take sharper images. But why 2 or 3 modes? Mode 1 is the standard mode, in many cases the best choice. With this mode, the lens stabilizes for movement up and down and right-left, keeping the subject centered and moving as little as possible. What about mode 2 or sport mode on some cameras? This mode is called the panning mode and only corrects movement at right angles to the camera's panning movement. If you didn't have this, when you move left to right, let's say, the lens would try to correct for the movement, which isn't what you want. You want up-down correction, but not right-left. Should I ever turn it off? On a tripod, some older lenses would sometimes make the image worse by moving around on its own at very low shutter speeds. On many newer lenses, like my Canon modern L lenses, the image stabilization auto-detects tripods and acts accordingly. So this isn't as much of an issue, but if your images from a tripod at static targets and low shutter speeds aren't sharp, try turning image stabilization off. Note that lens stabilization only corrects for camera movement, not subject movement. For the latter, use faster shutter speeds and track your subjects very accurately so they don't move much in the viewfinder. Now what about mode 3? Some lenses have a third mode, and on a Canon, this mode means that the image stabilization is off until you hit the shutter button. Now you may say, why would you want this mode? It's actually very handy when you and the camera are moving a lot, like shooting whales on a whale watching trip from a moving boat. It's actually more stable and easier to track without the image stabilization trying to fight and act against the movement continuously. Another issue that people run into is when they use semi-automatic settings like auto ISO or shutter and aperture priority, they only get 2 of the 3 exposure settings showing. The third one is either not showing at all or shows as auto, like in ISO. This can be a problem, as while you've allowed the camera to control the setting, you want to know what it is. What will be my shutter speed in aperture priority, for example? There's a quick fix for this. On most brands of cameras, half pressing the shutter button will show the missing setting. And by the way, if a setting in a semi-automatic mode is blinking, it means the camera can't move it any further. So in shutter priority, the aperture is blinking at f4. It means the camera would like to open the aperture even more, but can't because it's reached the maximum aperture of that lens. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. I built my own website using Squarespace and it was a breeze. It's a great all-in-one solution to host your company presence, show off your work, engage with your clients and followers, and sell products and services. There are tons of useful templates, including ones for specific genres like photography, which is mine. But the place to go now is to use the new Design Intelligence feature, which combines Squarespace's experience and cutting-edge AI, allowing you to tailor your own build to your own specific needs. A website is also a great way to monetize your work by setting up an online store using Squarespace payments, which you can set up with just a few clicks, and give your customers more ways to pay with Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, and Afterpay for buy now and pay later. Go to squarespace.com to sign up for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Simon for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The fourth setting that some people end up stuck with but don't know how to fix is the auto rotate feature. This happens when you shoot a photo in vertical orientation, but when you try to review your photo, you still get it in vertical with all the wasted space on the back of the LCD. You want to change auto rotate to off, or on my Canon camera, I have the option to leave it so I can review the photo by tilting my camera, but it will show up properly on my PC with being vertical orientation. I choose this button showing the laptop. On a Nikon, set auto image rotation to on. On a Sony, it's display rotation, and on a Fuji, it's image rotate. A very handy tool for photography when deciding on how bright your image should be is the histogram. But you may be asking, where do I find it? On most cameras, pressing the info or display button a few times will show the histogram on the back LCD, and even in the viewfinder for a mirrorless camera. On some cameras, you may need to enable the histogram first. For example, on a Fuji camera, go to Setup, Screen Setting, Display Custom Setting, Histogram. On a Nikon, Shooting Display, Custom Viewfinder Shooting Display. Then select the histogram option. On a Sony, it's Display, LCD, and then select the histogram. While most people will instinctively use the magnifying glass button for zooming in on photos after you've taken them, do you know that you can use it to zoom in before taking the shot? This is very handy to achieve detailed focus. On most cameras, pressing the magnifying glass several times will cycle through increasing levels of magnification, such as 5 times, 10 times, and even 15 times. When would you use this? In landscape photography, you might use this to check focus on several parts of the scene you plan to photograph at different focus points to merge together into a focus stack. In macro photography, you might want to manually check to make sure the focus is right. As with macro lenses up close, your focus depth of field is razor thin. Same with long, fast lenses for portraiture like 135mm f1.2. And finally, in Milky Way photography, I set my lens to manual focus, zoom in on a star using the magnify button, and manually focus back and forth on a bright star until I get it down to a small point. Did you know that most cameras have an electronic level? This can be displayed on the back LCD or even in the viewfinder to help you get a level shot. Most cameras have a system where the level shows as red when it's not level, but turns green when you're good. This is a great feature, especially in low light like astrophotography, where you don't really have a sense in the dark of what level is. Or in landscape photography, where a straight horizon is pretty important. If your photo isn't level, then you have to crop it to make it level, which makes you lose some of the photo on the edges of the frame. This may mess up your composition. So how do you turn this on? On many cameras like Nikons and Canons, cycling through the display or info buttons respectively will make it appear. But you may need to activate it in your menu first. On Sony, in the settings, hit Display, Monitor, Level. On a Fuji, Setup, Screen Setup, Display Custom Setting, Level. Do you find your camera's shutter noisy, especially when you're shooting in a quiet environment? Maybe a music recital, wedding ceremony, or maybe a chess match. It's time to turn on the electronic shutter. Many cameras have a mechanical shutter that allows the photographer to control the length of time the light is allowed to enter the camera. This is needed to either freeze the action or allow lots of time for light to enter in dark scenes. But rather than do this with a mechanical shutter, many cameras can have the shutter left open and capture the photo by digitally reading the information without the mechanical shutter being activated. This of course makes no noise compared to the clicking of the mechanical shutter for silent operation. But how do you enable this? It will depend on the brand, and in some brands may be called silent shooting. On a Canon camera, in the menus, it's shutter mode, electronic. On a Fuji, it's shooting settings, shutter type. On a Sony, settings 2, shutter type. On Nikon's, photo shooting menu, silent photography. One of the first things I turn on in a new camera is one of the most useful features for me, highlight alerts, or their nickname, blinkies. On some cameras, they may be shown as lines, called zebras. These are flashing colors on your back LCD during image review that indicate overexposure, or what we call blown out highlights. These indicate that you've made the image too bright, and these warnings show which parts of the image are blown, that is, have no color information. This isn't recoverable and tells you that you should take another photo if you can with a darker exposure level. How do we turn these on? On a Canon camera, these are called highlight alerts on my R5 in the blue menu, section 5. On a Sony, select custom settings, select zebra. On a Fuji, screen setup, display custom settings, highlight alerts. On a Nikon, playback menu, playback display options, highlights. Did you know that most cameras can be set up to shoot in black and white? Most cameras have a setting called picture styles or picture profiles, which adjust the style of JPEGs that the camera will produce from your RAWs. Even if you shoot in RAW, the picture profile will be used to change the photo you see in the viewfinder on a mirrorless camera and on the back LCD as well, because the back LCD isn't the RAW photo, but a JPEG your camera created to be displayed. The trick is if you set your picture profile to monochrome or black and white, your camera will act like a black and white camera. Now, why would you want to do this? Shooting in black and white is a great exercise in working out your photography brain. Without colors to make or break images, you will be forced to use shapes and patterns, the things black and white are great at showing off, instead of colors. This is a wonderful exercise to practice your photography and composition. Highly recommended. So how do you do this? On a Canon camera, picture styles is in the red menu and you set it to monochrome. On a Nikon, press the I button, set picture control, choose monochrome. On a Fuji, hit the Q button and select film simulation, B for black and white. On a Sony, in the menus, pick creative styles, black and white. By the way, if you're shooting RAW, when you load the image into your computer, it will be back into color. You can make it black and white again by hitting the B&W in Lightroom, for example, or lowering your saturation down to 0. And I promised you a bonus tip. Have you ever wondered what the heck this little thing is for? This lock on an SD card is to put it into read-only mode. That means that you can download photos from your card or view them on your back LCD, but you can't delete the photos nor add any more photos onto that card. This may come in handy if you have valuable photos on there but want to show them to a friend on their camera, or put the card aside to work on something and plan to get back to it later. Better safe than sorry. If you just got a new camera and want more help on the settings that I always change on a new camera, check out my video on that right here. If this video is deserving, give it a like and YouTube will show it to even more photographers, helping them get their cameras set up properly. And I hope that you can use these tips the next time you go out to get your own unique and amazing photos. I know you can do it.